both of you will be in Kunming for COP15. And the summit's theme is actually ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth. So Alice, could you explain the concept of ecological civilization, which is originally Chinese?
So it's not easy entirely to translate the concept, but basically living in harmony with nature is the very definition of sustainability. And in international dialogues, I often hear pushback from people saying, oh, it's a Chinese concept. But actually what it basically means is living sustainably, not taking more than we need and not taking more than can be replenished. It should be a global consensus.
So ecological civilization to me is about having a holistic view of the economy and the environment as interconnected. And we've talked about the value or how much our economy depends on nature. We're starting to understand that much better now. And I think all of these studies and this research is telling us that we need to manage our natural capital in the same way that we manage our built capital and human capital. So we need to invest in it and value it much better as we move forward over the next 10 years.
Why do you think the United Nations is promoting this concept globally?
Because it's essential. I mean, we are now in what's known as a sixth mass extinction. The rate of species loss is higher than it's been for literally thousands of years, and that's because of how we are affecting the planet. If we're going to reverse that, we need a fundamental shift in how we live. And that means acknowledging the fact that biodiversity is our life support machine. That means that we need to maintain it.
But according to the United Nations, the world has largely failed to meet the targets set in 2010 to safeguard species and ecosystems. Is it because the targets were too ambitious, or was there not enough work done to accomplish those goals?
I think the two main reasons why we're actually experiencing accelerating biodiversity loss are that, first of all, the process involves and is led by environment ministers who are generally relatively weak in governments. So they don't have much power they don't control the resources, they don't control agriculture, they don't control energy, many of these areas that are so important if you need to tackle biodiversity loss. And I think a lesson from the climate change UN process was that when leaders started to get involved, and economic ministers and finance ministers, that was when progress began to be made. And that process really started at Copenhagen in 2009, which led up to the Paris Agreement. And I think biodiversity needs to learn from that process and involve leaders and finance ministers and economic ministers. I think the second reason is a lack of resources attached to the biodiversity agreement. So, I mentioned earlier that we looked at how much was being spent on biodiversity and nature protection globally, and how much is needed over the next 10 years. And there's a big gap, $700 billion per year over the next 10 years. So we need to be very clear, have very clear mechanisms for generating that funding to go into biodiversity conservation. And so resource mobilization is a really important aspect of the new framework. So that's something that I really want to see focus on in the Kunming meeting, because without that resource going into biodiversity conservation, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve the targets that may be set in Kunming.